In cinematic portrayals, triumphant feasts of conquerors often feature overflowing horns, joyous shouts, and gleaming treasures. Yet, there is an untold, suppressed history that unfolds after the celebratory bonfires die down. This is the narrative of the fates of noble women, queens, princesses, and daughters of chieftains, whose domains fell to the invaders. Their plight was not a secondary detail but a carefully orchestrated part of the conqueror's strategy. This is not a tale of romance or miraculous rescue, but the harsh truth about the price paid for defeat. Let us examine 7 tragic examples of such destinies. This text is based on historical research and facts drawn from sources such as the Annals of Ulster and the Laxdæla saga. 1. The Women of Etir. 821 AD. Irish coast, the Annals of Ulster, dispassionately record an event, much like an accountant keeping ledgers. Under the year 821, it states, Etir was plundered by heathens, and they carried off a great number of women. Howth, known today by the same name, was a thriving settlement on a peninsula, controlling the northern approaches to Dublin Bay. It was a strategically vital location, and the raid was not a random act, but a deliberate seizure of resources. In the 9th century, one of the most valuable resources was people. These women, stripped of their names and origins by the brutal capture, were reclassified as thralls under Norse law. This was the lowest rung of society, signifying a status of property rather than personhood. Their journey into slavery began on the decks of longships, where they were packed tightly like living cargo. The sea voyage itself became an ordeal, endured only by the strongest. Their likely final destination was the burgeoning Viking port of Dyflin, later Dublin, one of Western Europe's largest slave markets. There, they were sorted, assessed, and sold. A healthy young woman could fetch between 12 and 20 ounces of silver, equivalent to a small peasant farm's annual income. They were purchased by Norse settlers in Ireland or shipped to markets in Hedeby, Denmark, and Birka, Sweden, or transported along the Rus river routes to the vast slave economies of the Byzantine Empire and the Abbasid Caliphate. Their skills in weaving or healing, once indicative of high status, now merely increased their price. The annals preserve no names. These women were merely a collective number in a report. Their individual lives and histories were deliberately erased and absorbed into the economic system of the Viking world. Captured, accounted for, silenced. 2. Melkorka. Myrkjartansdóttir. Mid-10th century, Ireland to Iceland. The Icelandic. Laxdæla saga, written 2 centuries after the events it describes, preserves the name of one such captive. Melkorka was the daughter of the Irish king Myrkjartan. Around 956 AD, her world collapsed under the blow of a Viking raid. She was captured, transported to Norway, and put up for sale in a bustling market. Höskuld Dalakolsson, a wealthy Icelandic chieftain on a trading voyage with the permission of the Norwegian king Hakon, was captivated by her beauty and dignity. He asked the merchant her name. The merchant, a Russ's trader named Gilli, replied that he did not know. Höskuld paid 3 marks of silver for her, an immense sum. 1 mark of silver was 8 ounces, meaning he paid 24 ounces of pure silver, 3 times the cost of a prime dairy cow. He bought not only her body, but also her silence. Throughout the journey to Iceland, and in the years that followed, Melkorka refused to speak. She lived in his home as a concubine, bearing him a son named Olafur. Everyone, including Höskuld, believed her to be mute. This was her defense, a desperate attempt to retain at least a part of her inner world in a situation of complete powerlessness. The truth was revealed by chance. One day, Höskuld, walking by a stream near his farm, overheard Melkorka speaking to their young son. She was teaching him her native Gaelic language. The saga preserves her words to the boy. His grandfather was Myrkjartan, king of the Irish. Hoskell demanded an explanation, and the story of her royal lineage was uncovered. Her position in the household improved somewhat, but she never gained her freedom. She remained in Iceland, a captive princess whose identity was accidentally revealed. Her son, Olafur, grew to be a powerful chieftain, known as Olafur Peacock for his lavish attire. He later traveled to Ireland with a trading caravan, met his grandfather, King Myrkjartan, and was recognized by the Irish nobility. However, Melkorka never saw her home again. She died in Iceland, thousands of miles from the kingdom she was meant to inherit. Bought, hidden, revealed. 3. The Abbess of Coldingham, 870 AD. Northumbrian coast, Scotland, in the autumn of 870 AD. The great heathen army, which had terrorized England for 5 years, turned its gaze northward. The forces were commanded by the notoriously cruel sons of Ragnar Lodbrok, including Ivar the Boneless and Halfdan. Their target was the monastery at Coldingham, a double monastery for monks and nuns, perched on a windswept cliff overlooking the North Sea. On this rugged coastline, overlooking the North Sea where waves crashed against the cliffs, stood Coldingham Monastery. The abbess, known to later chroniclers as Ebba the Younger, foresaw the impending threat. Viking raids on religious houses were infamous for their brutality, plundering, murder, and, most horrifyingly, systematic sexual violence against women. For Ebba and her nuns, this represented a fate worse than death, a defilement that, in their deep faith, desecrated the very soul. As the Viking army approached, Ebba gathered her community in the chapter house. The account, recorded by the 13th century chronicler Matthew Paris in his Flores Historiarum, is filled with grim resolve. She took a razor and, before her sister's eyes, cut off her own nose and upper lip, transforming her face into a bloody mask. She then commanded the other nuns to follow her example, to make themselves a spectacle of horror to barbarian lust. One by one, they obeyed her will. When the Vikings finally breached the monastery's defenses and stormed into the chapter house, they were met not with a group of trembling victims, but a silent assembly of deliberately disfigured women. The invaders, deprived of their expected spoils and enraged by this act of defiance, showed no mercy. They locked the doors, piled logs against the stone walls, and set the building ablaze. The abbess and her entire community burned to death. Their ultimate choice was not between life and death, but between two different kinds of death. They chose fire. Their bones, mingled with the ash and charcoal of their home, became one with the coastal soil, burned, buried, but not broken. This account is based on sources like Matthew Paris's chronicle and archaeological findings from Viking Age settlements. 4. Elf-Gifu and Abbess Leofrun, 1011 AD, Canterbury, England. In the heart of Kent in Canterbury, another tragic chapter of history unfolded in 1011 AD. For nearly 3 years, the Danish army, led by Thorkel the Tall, had ravaged southern England. King Ethelred the Unready's policy of paying ever-increasing sums of Downgeld had proven disastrous, only inciting further attacks. In September 1011, Thorkel's forces besieged Canterbury, the ecclesiastical capital of England. The city held out for 20 days, offering desperate resistance. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle reports that the defense was fierce, but the city fell due to the betrayal of Elfhere, a man whose life Archbishop Elfhere had previously saved. The Vikings burst through the gates. The Chronicle paints a grim picture. They took Archbishop Elfhere and Elf-Gifu, the king's reeve, and Leofrun, abbess of St. Mildred's monastery, and Godwina, Bishop of Rochester. All the city's leaders, both secular and spiritual, were captured. They then systematically plundered the magnificent Christchurch Cathedral and put most of the population to the sword. However, noble women like Ælfgifu and Abbess Leofrin escaped immediate death. They were too valuable, transformed into hostages, bargaining chips in brutal negotiations. The army held them captive for several months. Archbishop Ælfhere refused to pay his own ransom, declaring he would not buy his freedom with church money. In April 1012, at a drunken feast in Greenwich, enraged Vikings pelted him with animal bones before one of them finished him off with an axe blow to the head. He met a martyr's death. The fate of the women was quieter, but no less horrifying. They became part of the price of peace. The following year, Thorkel's army was paid a staggering £48,000 of silver to compel them to leave. The freedom of these high-ranking women was undoubtedly part of that deal. Their lives were valued as a separate item in the national ransom. They became pawns in the highest-stakes game of their time. Their survival depended on the weight of silver and the whims of their captors. Captured, ransomed, erased from memory. 5. The Women of Alt Clut. 870 AD, Strathclyde, Scotland. In 870 AD, in the Kingdom of Strathclyde, Scotland, another tragedy unfolded. While Halfdan and Ivar's army burned monasteries in the east, another group of Vikings attacked from the west. Leading them were Olafur the White, the Norse king of Dublin, and his ally Ivar. Their target was Alt Clut, the Rock of the Clyde, known today as Dumbarton Rock. This almost impregnable volcanic plug was the capital of the ancient kingdom of Strathclyde. For 4 months, the fortress withstood a brutal siege. The attackers could not scale the rock, so they surrounded it, cutting off its water supply. The Annals of Ulster report that after 120 days, the well inside the fortress ran dry. The defenders, exhausted by thirst, finally surrendered. This was followed by one of the largest slave trade events of the Viking Age in Britain. Olafur and Ivar spent the winter on the Clyde, gathering their spoils. In 871 AD, a fleet of 200 ships sailed back to Dublin, their holds packed with treasures and captive people. The Annals state that they brought a great prey of people, Angles, Britons, and Picts. King Artgal of Strathclyde was among the captives. His wife and other noble women of the court were now slaves. Artgal himself was later killed in Dublin at Olafur's instigation. For the women, their rank no longer mattered. They were now part of a vast human cargo. Their value was determined in the Dublin slave market. Their story demonstrates the scale and organization of Viking slave trade. This was not a random side effect of a raid, but a primary objective. Besieged, parched, sent into slavery. 6. Wives of the settlers. Late 9th century Iceland, the Landnámabók, Iceland's Book of Settlements, chronicles the colonization of the rugged island. This work often presents itself as a saga of intrepid pioneers striving for freedom and new horizons. However, alongside this, Landnámabók also contains grim evidence of the foundation upon which the new society was built. This foundation was the violence against women abducted from their homelands. The story of Ingimund the Old, a powerful chieftain from Norway, serves as a vivid example. Before settling in Iceland, his retinue, along with his foster brothers, conducted raiding expeditions in Ireland. The Landnámabók unequivocally states that they returned with captives. One of them was the Irish noblewoman Refgard, forcibly taken as a wife by the Viking Eyvind Sörkver, and compelled to endure an existence on the harsh land of Iceland. Another leader, Ketil Flatnose, settled in Kirkjubær. The chronicle notes that he was a Christian, and pagans did not live there. However, his descendants intermarried with families whose ancestresses were Irish captives, who had become thralls. Genetic studies corroborate these grim narratives. Modern DNA analysis shows that while the majority of male Icelandic settlers had Norse paternal lineage, up to 63% of the female founders originated from Ireland and Scotland through their maternal lines. The brutal arithmetic of history testifies, behind every chieftain who established a settlement stood women forcibly torn from their homes to become unwilling wives and mothers. They became the cornerstone of a new nation, a foundation laid in blood and violence, plundered, transported, deprived of will. 7. The Oseberg Ship, Lady, 834 AD, Vestfold, Norway. In 1904, archaeologists excavating a burial mound near the Oslo Fjord in Norway discovered a priceless artifact from the Viking Age, the Oseberg ship, magnificently preserved in a layer of clay. This 21-meter-long wooden vessel was astonishingly ornate, its prow intricately carved in the shape of a coiled serpent. Inside the ship was a burial chamber, worthy of royalty, dated to the summer of 834 AD. It was filled with treasures, an intricately decorated wooden cart, 3 ceremonial sledges, beds, chests, tapestries, and the remains of 15 horses and 4 dogs. Within the burial chamber lay the skeletons of 2 women. One was elderly, aged 70-80 years. Her bones showed signs of advanced cancer. She was likely a woman of immense power, perhaps a queen or a priestess. For decades, it was believed that the second woman, younger at around 50 years, was her loyal servant or companion who had voluntarily followed her mistress into the afterlife. However, modern scientific research reveals a far darker picture. Analysis of the younger woman's mitochondrial DNA identified a genetic marker, haplogroup U7, extremely rare in Scandinavia. It is most frequently found in regions around the Black Sea and Iran. This data strongly suggests she was a foreigner, brought to Norway from distant lands. Isotopic analysis of her bones also revealed a sharp change in diet in her final years, a shift to protein-rich food characteristic of the Norse nobility. This indicates she had not always lived in these lands. The presumed scenario is truly horrifying. She could have been a noblewoman from the East, captured during a raid and forcibly brought into the household of the powerful Oseberg queen. Her life in Norway was privileged compared to that of a field thrall, but she remained property nonetheless. When her mistress died, her life was sacrificed, perhaps voluntarily as part of a ritual, or perhaps not, to serve in death as she had served in life. The lavish burial was not for her, but a reflection of her owner's status. Her presence in this magnificent tomb is not a story of loyalty, but an act of absolute ownership. Bound, buried, forgotten. The stories do not end there. In 2009, workers constructing a bypass for the 2012 Olympic Games in Dorset, England, discovered a mass grave on Ridgeway Hill. In the pit were the skeletons of 54 young men, executed around 1000 AD. The bodies were haphazardly thrown in, but 51 skulls were neatly piled separately to one side. Chemical isotope analysis of their teeth, which record the geology of where a person grew up, proved that all of them were from Scandinavia, one from the high Arctic north. This was a Viking raiding party, captured and systematically executed by local Anglo-Saxons. It was a brutal act of local resistance, but this dramatic finding of slain Viking men is an anomaly in the written sources. The chronicles of the time, from the Annals of Ulster to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, are filled with countless entries that speak not of captured Viking men, but of captured local women. For every Viking crew that met its end on a foreign shore, dozens of ships returned home, their holds filled with human plunder. These women were the invisible currency of the Viking Age, the true spoils of war, their fates unrecorded, their names lost. Their value was measured in silver, but their loss was absolute.